mulțumesc pentru invitație. E o onoare să fiu aici. Voi continua in limba engleză. For us, it's very interesting, and for me to follow this discussion because what we're seeing now in brief is an urgency within the Romanian state and within the private sector for digitalization to proceed. And as Dragos spoke to, not just digitalization, but a true digital transformation. What that means for our international cooperation has several components, but specifically to the idea of cybersecurity and how that fits into the picture, it will be at the forefront of our considerations. We've enjoyed an excellent bilateral partnership in the field of cybersecurity, and it's been a core foundation of the U.S.-Romania strategic partnership. And there are several steadfast champions of that partnership who either spoke earlier or are speaking later in this event. And we're very grateful for that cooperation. Right now, as we look at the post-COVID recovery and what the promise of digitalization will bring, we also need to look at what sorts of investments are necessary in cybersecurity as a core sort of mission competency and priority, not just in the level of technical specialists, but in the level of policymakers, in the legislative framework, and for C-suite executives that will need to incorporate this type of cyber thinking into their overall strategy. For us right now, we've had a change in administration in the United States, but we've been very clear that we will continue on a path where cybersecurity is a priority, securing 5G technologies and networks will be a priority, and that we will keep working with our steadfast allies and partners like Romania to improve our capabilities, our readiness, and our resiliency in cyberspace. And resiliency has been such a huge focus, not just at the EU level, but also at the NATO level in terms of building next generation networks and capabilities that are purpose-built and fit to the task to support that transformation, not just in the economic or commercial sphere, but in national security and military domains in other fields. Another big part of that, especially in the context of the threats posed by COVID, and I know that Tony Rogue was speaking to this earlier from the Cyberint perspective, is how do we combat some of this destructive and destabilizing malicious cyber activity, particularly by ever sophisticated nation state actors. And we need to use a full range of diplomatic means to hold actors accountable and raise costs on anyone, whether it be groups, whether it be more sophisticated adversaries that are using cyberspace as that type of domain. In terms of our bilateral cooperation right now, what we want to focus is continuing to strengthen the bonds and training and exchanges in which we can support and have supported Romanian public sector officials, academia, and the private sector with strengthening cyber strategy, cyber defense, and other capabilities that will really underpin where things are headed. And we really want to congratulate Romania's success with securing the European Cyber Competence Center, but also even efforts right now within the Romanian states to elevate and strengthen the cybersecurity coordination in the public administration, particularly with the plans for the new cyber directorate. Not just in those domains in terms of strategy, but also in terms of combating cyber crime and internet-enabled crime has been a huge area where we have seen a fruitful and ongoing cooperation. We've provided a lot of training and coordination efforts to work with Romanian law enforcement or those in the judicial sector so that we can improve the ability to investigate and prosecute cyber and internet-enabled crime. Oftentimes, these investigations are becoming more complex because the cyber criminals are becoming more sophisticated and operating in several countries that really demands a coordinated international law enforcement approach to combating cybercrime. So that's been a priority for our mission. Additionally, we heard from Director Campan from the CERT and General Rogue, but working with entities like CERT and Cyberint to increase cyber awareness and offer training on critical infrastructure protection, incident response, but increasingly on ways in which public authorities in the private sector can build that type of continuous dialogue so that the challenges faced by companies are not faced alone, are in close coordination with entities responsible for network defense and incident response. Another big area for us has been strengthening our economic cooperation. Our economic partnership is one of the three real pillars of the strategic partnership. And what we really hope to see is that the US companies that have invested in Romania, particularly in the ITC sector, and continue to see the Romanian market as a very attractive base, not just as a national base, but as a regional base, based on the talent and the experience and demonstrated record of the Romanian IT labor force, to make Romania a hub for investment and services, and also to offer best-in-class solutions from US companies that are ready to work with Romanian authorities to realize this type of digital transformation and provide any sort of services necessary, and continue to open that dialogue that's already been very fruitful in terms of looking at the short-term priorities for Romania's digitalization and recovery using some of the resilience funds. And then lastly, I think another big focus for us has been trying to develop educational exchanges or other opportunities in which we can strengthen cybersecurity, not just as a domain of industry and government and national security, but also as a sphere of innovation and research and development. And so we truly are supportive of those efforts to strengthen, not just at the university level, but in all formats, trying to improve Romania's record as a base of research and innovation in cybersecurity. Speaking to where we are now, especially over the last year, I think what's become very clear in terms of cyber threats is that we're facing a growingly sophisticated actors that are not just targeting governments, but also targeting the private sector in equal measure. This is not just about statecraft, and it's a global problem that demands international cooperation among like-minded states and allies. But it also demands cooperation with trusted companies and non-government organizations. And to accomplish that, timely, ongoing cooperation between the public and the private sectors is essential to share that threat information and to try to develop some mitigation strategies so that network defenders can take immediate action. We've learned this experience firsthand in the United States, and what we've tried to focus on is using every network available of incident responders, of government to government, of government to business, to be as transparent and timely as possible in alerting not just the public administration, but also companies as to how to take those necessary steps. And I think what it's shown over the past 3 months especially is that this is no longer a domain strictly for the technical experts. And as I mentioned earlier, it will really take a whole of government or whole of organization approach to allocate resources, to educate your users or your employees or the public sector workforce that isn't in the cyber IT field, but then also to implement necessary countermeasures. And the one last point that I'll make, since several speakers already have touched on where we're moving in terms of 5G security, this has been a top priority for the Biden-Harris administration right now, but it's also been an area where we've had a very fruitful cooperation with the government of Romania and with the presidential administration over the past couple years. And right now, we see that 5G telecommunications is often characterized in terms of what will happen and the impact on mobile networks and the transition from 4G to 5G. But what we're also looking at is a potentially transformative technology in many spheres of critical infrastructure, and the benefits and applications of which will truly go beyond mobile networks. And for that reason, we see security of 5G networks as an absolute imperative that really needs to be built in by design and considered really from the initial phases of 5G rollout. And as we move from sort of non-standalone 5G as it exists today to the truly transformative applications of 5G that we'll probably see in the next few years. Oftentimes, I think the discussion around 5G security focuses on 5G radio networks, but we really need to ensure that supply chains for everything from chips to switches to core to routers to radio equipment to small cell technology is developed and implemented by companies that have a proven track record of a security-first approach and share our values for transparency, security, and integrity, both in terms of building out the overall infrastructure, but also in terms of protecting the data of users and of organizations from any undue access or opportunities, both in terms of vulnerabilities that are the result of, sort of sloppy code or other incidental issues, but also those that are more malicious potential vulnerabilities or even up to the level of backdoors. So to that end, we are very much appreciative that Romania has been a leader within the EU in terms of looking at this sort of threat landscape and looking at the imperative for 5G security, both from a technical perspective, but also from the legislative perspective and from a strategic perspective. And that's an opinion that's now been clearly shared at the level of the European Commission in terms of what's been recommended by the 5G toolbox in trying to mitigate any sort of risks from untrusted or high-risk suppliers throughout the network, but also increasingly in the dialogue at the NATO level. And we've certainly seen Deputy Secretary General Joanna has been very vocal about that in terms of the importance of secure and trusted 5G networks at that level as well. And so I think the important thing from the international cooperation perspective is that the United States and the European Union really do agree on this issue, that we have to carefully assess the long-term impacts of allowing any high-risk suppliers direct or indirect access to 5G networks. And what we're trying to do now is to continue to work with our partners and allies like Romania, but also work with the industry to support a diverse and vibrant supply chain of trusted equipment and services that really guarantees the integrity and resilience of the networks. And I think this is an area where, not just from the US perspective, but especially within Europe right now, the push to sort of strengthen Europe's research and innovation capabilities and development of these technologies, there's also an opportunity to bring technologies to the table from both the United States and the EU that are developed by companies that really truly share our values and interests as much as they address some of the underlying technical issues. So I'll stop there. I think there's plenty of avenues in which we can continue to expand our international cooperation, but we truly appreciate how the government of Romania and other authorities, but also in other partners in the private sector, academia in Romania, have been such strong champions of elevating cybersecurity as a priority of our strategic partnership. So I'll stop there and thank you for the dialogue today.